I know self-publishing's not for everyone. Nothing is. But if you've considered self-publishing for even a minute, listen up, because I'm betting I know what's holding you back from exploring it further or getting started. Number one, you think the self-publishing process is a lot harder than it actually is. And number two, you're understandably afraid of doing it, air quote, wrong. So I've created a new free resource for you. It's called the Self-Publishing Starter Kit, and you can get instant access to it by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101. In this free training, you'll discover the exact 4 steps to focus on and mistakes to avoid so you can publish an incredible book that's indistinguishable in quality from a New York Times bestseller without overthinking, overguessing, or overspending in areas that won't make a difference. Again, visit publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101 to get instant access. Hello, and welcome to the Write the Damn Book Already podcast. My name is Elizabeth Lyons. I'm an author and book editor, and I help people write and publish thought-provoking, wildly entertaining books without any more overthinking, second-guessing, or overwhelm than absolutely necessary. Because let's face it, some overthinking, second-guessing, and overwhelm is going to come with the territory if you're anything like me. In short, I love books. And I believe that story and shared perspective are 2 of the most impactful ways we connect with one another. A few things I don't believe in: gimmicks, magic bullets, and swoon-worthy results without context. As in, be sure to reveal that a result took 8 years or required a $30,000 investment in ads, because those details are just as important. What I believe in most as an author: the long game is the shortcut. For more book writing and publishing tips and solutions, visit publishaprofitablebook.com or visit me over on Instagram at Elizabeth Lyons Author. Hi, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome in if this is your first time listening. When you hear the title, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl, do you get as excited as I did? Because as we talked about, Nanda and I, sometimes there's so much you can glean from a title that just makes you want to dive right in. So Nanda Reddy's book, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl, just recently came out March 4th of 2025. And it was so much fun to talk to her about the writing and the publishing and the launching. She so well summarizes what I think so many of us hope for when we write a book, any genre. It's not necessarily or even often about the money or the sales numbers or the bestseller lists. It's about the feedback that we get from readers who are so drawn in, so entertained, so touched by a particular line, so curious about where something came from. And then we in turn get to be curious about why something struck them in that way, because there's always a story behind that as well, which is something I absolutely love. As per usual, I learned about a whole bunch of books and several resources in the course of this conversation that I want to dive into, and fellow writers can absolutely utilize when it comes to finding great beta readers and critique partners. And I share all of that in the episode notes, as well as all of the information on where you can connect with Nanda online, on social media, and of course, where you can grab a copy of her book, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the conversation. Well, first of all, how great did it feel for your debut to get the kind of feedback that you've received?
Oh gosh. And still, like this morning, I woke up to a review that it's still just every time I get a review where it touches a reader so deeply that they say all these amazing things. I'd have to pinch myself because isn't that the goal, right? To connect when we're writing, and you want to sell books and you want to write a book, but we really just want to do that magic thing of connecting and having them see the story kind of how the way you saw it in your head. And so, I got reviews from Library Journal. That was a starred one, which was wow. And like, Kirkus and
Sure.
Booklist. It's always just an honor to be reviewed in any of those outlets. But to get the reader responses that have been so positive, it just means so much, so much.
Because it's just newly out. It came out on March
Last week,
3rd, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
March 4th.
yeah,
So
4th.
today's the
Okay.
week. Yeah.
How long has the story been percolating for you? I mean, have you always written? Did you tell me a little bit about your journey to the book?
Yeah, no, I have been writing for years and years and years. This is, I'd say, technically the fourth novel I've written, uh,
Hmm.
but it feels like the one I was meant to write. It
Mm.
was percolating in my head a while, maybe like 4 years or so before I actually wrote any of it. And honestly, when it came to me, I didn't feel skilled enough to write it because I knew it would be weaving a bunch of identities. I kind of
Yeah.
knew this woman would be hiding her identity, and every other story I had told before felt so straightforward.
Mhm.
And I don't have an MFA or anything like that. I've always written. I've always written kind of secretly because I don't know. I just didn't want to tell people I
It's
was
so
writing.
weird. Do you think that's still when you talk to other authors? I'm interrupting you, admittedly, and I apologize, but I'm still doing it. Do you think when you talk to other authors, I'm curious how much people still feel like the whole I don't have an MFA because I don't either, and I don't, with the exception of maybe Joanna Rakoff. I'm trying to think of someone I've spoken to recently who actually does, and I don't think it's that common anymore. But yet we still lean on that. Like, I'm not really a writer. I wasn't trained as a writer.
Right. I mean, I definitely think it opens doors for people in
Sure.
that, and it adds a sense of validity and credibility to you
Absolutely. Hmm.
instantly. I started in the slush pile with through Query Tracker when I was looking for an agent because I don't have an in anywhere. And even when you go to these writers conferences and things, everyone's like, if there's someone with an MFA at your table, everyone's like, ooh, that person must know how to write. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? There's this
Yes.
instant expectation, I suppose. Although I think you're absolutely right. Most of us don't, who are publishing or writing and working at it, we don't have MFAs. It's not that convenient to go back to school when you've decided, okay, really, this is what I want to do and I want to study it. And we all study craft anyway, right? We read nonstop. I feel like that is the best way to study craft is
Hmm.
read and sort of read critically as you're reading. But we've also all read every book out there. I'm sure I'm not the only one who kind of has a shelf load of
Yeah.
how-to books
Do you
and
have a favorite, or do you have
I
one
do.
that you? Okay.
I mean, I have a couple, but
Yeah.
I have I love the gosh, now it just left my head. The art,
Of course.
the science of storytelling by
Uh-huh.
Will Storr. I love that one because I don't know. He just gets to the heart of story and
Mhm.
which is character for I believe, right? I mean, you have
Yes.
to have plot, of course, for a story to move along, and I have a very strong plot in my book, but it has to have happen to someone. It has to happen to something, and it has to be meaningful. You have to watch someone be affected by the plot and change because of the plot. And so, I don't know. He Will Storr. He has another book out on writing that I
Mhm.
haven't bought yet, but I will. But I love the science of storytelling. But it's not formulaic at all. I do also kind
Mhm.
of like some of those. I feel like they go hand in hand with like you have. I read all kinds of
Sure.
craft books, but the one like there's the gosh, they're all on my bookshelf, and now I'm blanking on all their names.
As we do. Like
But
I have one that I really enjoy, and I can't like you, I can think of the author's name, but not the name of the book. I'll put it in the episode note. I'll put all of this in the episode notes, but it's Matthew Dix, and it's have you read that one?
oh,
I'm pretty sure I've got his name right. And it's storytelling, but he's big with the moth. So
yes,
it's more storytelling, oral storytelling as opposed to on the page, but still he really hits those nuts and bolts of like what brings people in,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like for me, I had to, I read, Stephen King on writing and the Anne Lamott. Those are like
Oh, yeah.
inspirational books,
Yeah.
and those are important. But there are a couple of books I read that really helped me understand the role of, I don't know, pacing and plot. And I
Hmm.
went to my bookshelf just now to get them because I couldn't remember the titles. The Anatomy of Story by John Truby is
Okay. I have
is
not read that one yet. Okay.
so he is actually a screenwriter, and
Hmm.
but it was really interesting. And then Story Engineering, which is very similar to it. Both of those kind of helped me understand that I couldn't just be a pantser. I was always kind of this pantser. And before, when I wrote my first novel, not that a plot didn't emerge, but it took
Right.
forever for me to figure out the plot. Um, they helped me understand the point of like kind of knowing sort of where you're going. Even though I'm not a plotter, I can't be. If I write a plot down, I'll deviate from it. I know I will.
I do too. But do you have to start with something, or and let's just put the whatever here. I can't even, words are not my friend today. The disclaimer here that your process will undoubtedly evolve, as all of ours do, from one book to the next. But
Absolutely.
did you, for this one anyway, and for the ones that you had written before, do you have some loose idea of where you want it to go, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, of course, right? You kind of have like these sort of blurry signposts in the fog, and you kind of have to get to it. What I think these more formulaic books help you understand is, beats that you probably need to
Yeah.
get. And then when you start reading critically and thinking about some of that stuff, you see them. And you're like, okay, maybe
Mhm.
this is why I do like this book, or I understand why this works. And then when you internalize that a bit and you go back to your pantsing, I think it kind of comes out. Now, this plot in my novel is very it's fast paced, and
Mhm.
it is a plot that gets where the protagonist gets deeper and deeper into trouble, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And maybe some of that comes from me kind of, I gravitate to books that move fast, but I also love books with language that like play with language that where it's not just what the story is, but how the story is being told.
Hmm.
And that's so important to me. And I think the Will Storr book, which is the science of storytelling, he kind of marries all of that, where there's plot,
Right.
but there's also story and like connection and yeah.
And that raises such an interesting point, because I think as writers, well, first of all, again, we get to change our minds from piece to piece, how we want to do things, but there isn't a right way, right? So sometimes people like to read books that are not just fast paced, and I don't want to give any examples because I don't want it to sound like I'm putting those books down in any way, but okay, a beach read. So
Mhm.
whenever someone says it's a great beach read, what I hear them saying is it doesn't require a lot of my brain cells. Like, it's just going to be fun. I'm not going to have to read a sentence 3 times to pick up its meaning. And then on the flip side of that, there are books like The Covenant of Water,
Right,
Abraham Verghese,
right.
which I am reading so slowly. Like, I'm reading it while I'm reading other books because I love it for a totally different reason, but I also know I have to really, I want to really savor it,
Hmm.
and I need to be fully focused.
Right. Yes. Yes. I'm with you with that. I'm not a beach reader, actually. I don't like,
Really?
I mean, okay, actually, I take that back. I have read, I mean, I guess Emily Henry will fall in that category, right? I do read those, and I enjoy them as like palate cleansers, but they tend to not be like the books I will ever like not that, I mean, people love
I
them.
hear you.
They're not the books I will go back and read
Yeah,
or like think about afterwards
right.
or just like often I mean, my book club will read those for sure, but not like hand to a friend and be like, you have to read this, right? And it's more like Covenant of Water that's like that. I'd like to think my book kind of falls in that middle space, I hope, where it's accessible and it quote unquote entertains, even though it is heavy, and there is attention to the language.
So I have so many questions. When you get to a stuck point, do you ever get to a stuck point? Do you ever feel like I don't know where this is going, or I don't know how to write about this, just where it's not flowing out of you as readily?
I'm there right now with my work. Yeah. I understand. I'm there. Yeah.
Okay, so what is your process for that? Because I think that's something we all experience as writers, and oftentimes new authors or first-time authors, which is a large majority of my audience, they think that means that they're not supposed to be doing this.
Yes, I mean, that never goes away. That feeling of this is that I mean, I feel like I've hurtled over that fence and I'm on the other side because I've published a book, but that's still, I guess it's imposter syndrome that ends up creeping in, right? But it's not just that. I'm in the book I'm writing right now. The reason I'm stuck is that it feels like the character, like I'm forcing a situation with the character that's not as maybe organic to her, and then perhaps it feels like I'm forcing the plot onto her.
Oh,
and so I paused because I paused, and then of course that leads to being stuck. But I do think part of solving that is just sitting back down, and then allowing what I've done in the past, like with this book that's published. When I did get to a spot where I wrote a character a certain way and I was writing it a certain way. And my first reader was actually I'd signed up for this Writer's Digest class where this professor was just expecting 10,000 words at a time and then responding very quickly. But my question was, I was going in a direction that felt wrong and I had another one. And he was like, well, just write that one too. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. I could write them both. I could go in both directions. And so there's the why not? What's the harm, right? I mean, otherwise.
I'll tell you what the harm is. The harm is that now you've air quote wasted. This would be my answer. Well, now I've wasted my time. And that answer would be very, I guess, like tongue in cheek and like because we never waste time when we're writing.
No,
that's my belief. That's my belief. But I think that would be a pushback on that question.
Yes, I'm with you with that in that feeling of wasting time.
Sure.
But the truth is you end up wasting more time when you are stuck.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is if you write it 4 or 5 different ways and you give yourself that freedom, you become unstuck, number one, and you end up, I think, using little bits from all of those back in the new one. Like all of the things that you know are good, come back. They come
back. It's not A or B. It ends up being some combination of A and B.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's someone who asked a question about this book. There's a character, Marcus, who shows up throughout the 3/4 of the way in and is somewhat significant to the main character. And, oh gosh, I'll be giving something away. But they asked about why I didn't bring him back. It would have felt too buttoned up, right? But I
buttoned up. Okay.
I had actually written it that way once because I couldn't let go of him either. And the first reader, he said, "Are you sure you want to go in this direction? Like, what are your thoughts?" And I knew in my heart of hearts that this was the wrong direction, even though So there's
you knew it was the wrong direction to bring him back.
Yes.
Okay. Readers or wondering what to say in your emails? Your email list is your most valuable asset as an author. And writing emails that engage and entertain your readers should be easy. You just wrote an entire book, for God's sake. From communicating with your launch team to building long-term relationships with readers, my customizable email templates take all the guesswork out of writing emails that turn email subscribers into loyal readers. They also help you help others know exactly what to say to their email lists to effortlessly promote your books to their audiences. Ready to save time and grow your readership? Grab your templates now at publishaprofitablebook.com/book-launch-emails or through the link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode.
Yes, because of the too buttoned up and too convenient.
And it's such a hard thing to reconcile, I think, because especially with your debut, it can feel when someone else gives you that feedback, it's so easy to go, oh, maybe I am doing it wrong. Maybe I should. That word just comes out all the time. Do it the way that they are suggesting.
But I think I intuitively knew that I was doing something that just felt good. You know, I was writing this sort of happy ending.
Yeah.
Like was too happy. That was just and
to Emily Henry. And I love an Emily Henry. I love it. That's why I read it, because I know it's going to end well.
And you also know exactly what you're going to get, right? And so I do too. Because you can't read The Covenant of Water and then you can't read books like that over and over. Just
Agreed.
So much, right? You've got to. I read widely. I'll read a thriller. I'll read a beach read. So I do read them, but what I mean, like my favorite books, invariably end up being the harder ones.
Well, it's so interesting. There's only one genre, and now that I say this, someone's going to try to get me into it. There's only one genre. It's like music. I just can't get into country music. I can't do it. I can maybe get into the newer stuff that's a little more pop country, but if you try to take me back to what's kind of core country, I can't do it. Within books, it's historical fiction that I cannot. And
what about Kristen Hanna? Like she writes it with always a romance.
So, okay, here's the thing. On my to be read very, very long list is The Women. I have yet to read, right? So, like, I haven't read Kristen Hanna yet, if anyone can believe.
Can I tell you, if you haven't read Kristen Hanna yet, I know everyone's raving about The Women, and it's great. I actually thought The Four Winds was one of, just because there wasn't a lot of buttoning up and things happening for the romance down the road. Am I allowed to say unpopular opinions?
Oh my gosh, please. I mean, as long as we're not throwing anyone, we don't need any more drama in the book space. So like,
she is amazing. And the book is fantastic. It presents the Vietnam War, the women in the Vietnam War, or particularly one woman. And it's fantastic, especially the whole second half when she comes back to America and the war is no longer popular and everyone's pretending like we're always on that side, right? And but The Four Winds is actually about the Dust Bowl, which sounds so boring.
Well, okay, let me take back now. You're making me realize something about myself. I like books, and maybe you're going to tell me this is historical fiction, but where I can learn about history.
That's historical fiction.
Okay. Well, but I don't read tons of them. When I think of historical fiction, what I think of, and I don't know why, is Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, then maybe I do like historical fiction.
I mean, one of the biggest books was All the Light You Cannot See.
Oh, I know. I haven't read that one yet.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Okay.
It's World War II, of course, but it's,
of course, yeah.
You're in France and you are with this blind girl, and
yes,
it's just a gorgeous book.
Okay, that'll go. I mean, there's just not enough time in right. It's just, sometimes I feel bad because I'm like, no, I haven't read that yet, and I feel like I should read everything, but I can't any more than anyone else can. Good
The only way I started reading, I try to read 100 books a year, but the only way I could do that is actually audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a whole cohort of people who are like, that's not real
That's
reading.
not reading.
It absolutely is. You
I think
actually
it absolutely is.
you have to learn how to do it because it is hard to get into and to get your brain there. But once you're there, you can do it. And I cook when I used to drive my kids all over the place, but now my youngest is 16 and I don't have to do that anymore.
Yep, me too.
Yeah. And so all of the driving, going to like, I would be at the soccer game with my hair like this, listening to an audiobook, just because, because that's the only way you could get those in is audio.
So I have a question about audiobooks. I'm glad you brought that up because you somehow, some way managed to get, or Zibby managed to get the narrator from The Fourth Wing to narrate a girl within a girl within a girl. Yeah.
Oh, I can't take credit for any of that. I was floored when that's who.
And
she is so talented. Can I just tell you how talented she is?
You can tell me, and I'm going to find out because I'll listen to, like, I haven't read The Fourth Wing. Now that's a genre that I would tell you I also wasn't really into.
That's one where I haven't read those either.
You haven't? Okay.
I'm not a high fantasy gal.
Well, I'm not really either, except my oldest daughter, who's 25, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, maybe said, Mom, just for grins, can you just indulge me and read A Court of Thorn and Roses? And I was like, God. So I read the first chapter and I'm like, She said, just get to chapter 5. That's all you have to do. Just get to chapter 5.
Chapters. Okay.
It was a lot of chapters, but then when I got there, I truly could not put it down. Now, I haven't read the second book, but it nabbed me. So I thought, I'll give The Fourth Wing a try. If for no other reason, I kind of want to see what all the fuss is about.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, when you heard her read it, I hear this a lot from authors, someone else reading your book, the voices don't sound the way that you heard them in your head.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, and for me, it complicates it a little bit more. And Kaya, she knows this. But when I got the auditions, because I got 3 audition reels to listen to, I'd already told my editor and my publishing house, they already knew and understood that because there's a Guyanese character in my book, and there's the Guyanese patois that comes out, that it was super important to me that we have a Guyanese reader. Now, Guyana is a small country. We've got less than 1 million people living in it. And, we're not a huge population. And maybe there isn't maybe there isn't actually a female Guyanese voice actor. I don't know. Probably not, because they couldn't find one. And they were like, well, please just give these a chance. And I had 2 quote unquote friends who I was like, can they please audition? And they were like, at first they said, sure. And they sent all their information. But then Zibby, the publishing house, actually, I think they have a contract with like a recording studio or whatever. They outsource this stuff, like a recording studio that has to work. And so the director or the producer or whatever was like, I don't like working with people's friends who are not professionals, because number one, they don't know what they're doing, which is
right.
Fake. And
number one, first of all, yeah.
And they've never done it before, and there's all this blocking, and they have to try to get it done in a week. And,
sure.
And this was happening a month before publication date, or a month and a half. And so they were like, if we want it out at the time, so I kind of felt like, well, now I'm forced to pick someone who doesn't have the accent. And I went through, and Kaya's voice immediately, when she was reading just the non-accented parts of the book, I was just like, oh my God, this is like, when you hear magic, like when you hear someone's got talent, right? And I was like, this lady is really, really talented. And I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know she was the narrator for Fourth Wing. I didn't know any of this yet. I just knew she was so talented. And then when she got to the accented part, I was like, nope, that's not right. And so, because it sounded more like Jamaican to me than definitely not Guyanese. And so I ended up recording kind of how it sounded and sending links to kind of this guy's YouTube station channel where she could maybe listen and get the cadence in. And again, I knew she was professional enough that
What a great idea.
she was able to get it. Because then I started looking her up and seeing some of the clips of her work on her Instagram. And I was like, oh, she could do all kinds of things. She'll be able to do this. And sure enough, at the end, it's not the voice in my head. And it's not like a Guyanese person who is native will know it's not truly a Guyanese reader, but it's not jarring enough where you're like, oh, she's brilliant. She's actually quite brilliant.
That's amazing.
I found out like just how big, because even after I knew it was the fourth wing and all that stuff, I knew she was gonna be the narrator before that book came, the Onyx and that one came out.
Yeah.
It was really when that came out and the New York Times was like, oh, it's breaking all these Harry Potter records and there's lines. And I was like, oh, this is really, really big. Because I didn't realize even then how big that series
Did she narrate the Onyx too?
She's Violet, and so she's going to be.
Okay.
I think she's going to be the Violet throughout.
Okay. I don't even know.
I know what that means. I'm
not 100% sure.
I've listened to enough audiobooks that I do know that there's like, different voices for different characters in some way. And so.
But that's so. It really must require an extreme level of talent to be able to voice not only different characters, but different genders, different accents, different, all the things.
This is what she does in this book, my book. She'll do, there are different characters that come up. There's the husband, and then she's doing that voice, and it just sounds like a male voice. And then
if you can't do that, like if the narrator can't do that, I can't. That's when I have a trouble listening to fiction on audiobooks.
And then she does it consistently. Every time he comes up, she sounds exactly the same. And then she does the kid voice, and it sounds, and she has like a different voice for each of the characters. It's amazing. It's amazing.
That's amazing. That is very cool. And a girl within a girl within a girl. The title was that always the title?
No, actually,
I love that title. By the way.
And it is the perfect title, and it sort of comes out of the book. It's not verbatim from the book, but when you get to that spot, you're like, oh, yeah, it just dovetails very nicely. But it's interesting how I didn't realize it right away. I was actually at a workshop in Tahoe. I live in Reno. Tahoe's not very far, and there's this great workshop called the Community of Writers. And I was workshopping that scene. Where that title comes from. And I remember, there's like 8 or 9 other writers, and they all give you feedback, but almost every single person highlighted that line, and they were like, this is such a beautiful line. This is brilliant. Love this, etc. And it was that like night as I was flipping through that I was like, that's my title. That's the title. Right. And it's funny how like it takes something like that for it to pop out at you.
I often find like when I'm editing that the title is somewhere in the book. So sometimes authors are like, either they don't know what the title is, or they're married to a particular title, but they came up with the title before they wrote the book. And then an air quote, you see the air quotes, better title comes through when you have someone who's a little more removed from it and can read it through. I just think a girl within a girl within a girl says so much. How many words is that? Within a girl within 8? It says so much in 8 words. That
with the same 8 words, like the repeat, like
I know, but it says so much, right? It's like, it's so fascinating to me how we can spend however many words, 100,000, 110,000, whatever, if we're writing fiction. And yet we need to summarize it. We need to grab a reader to get into those 100,000 words with between 1 and, well, in this case, 8 words, but it's hard to go over 8. Or so with a title.
Oh, I'm pushing it. Yeah, 8.
Yeah. I mean, even like another one that I love that I think says so much is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, yes.
Right. 5 words, but you get the whole gist right from the title.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not easy to do.
No. But my former title was long and not correct. I mean, it was called A Life of Deafening Lies. And partly it was because there's this deaf theme woven throughout.
Okay.
She's got a deaf sister, and deaf brother that she leaves behind in Guyana. And the guy she marries, her husband has a deaf sister, and
Okay.
and their child, one of their children, is deaf. And so there's like
Okay.
this kind of deaf theme, and I have a deaf sister, but there's a deaf theme woven throughout
Mm,
that I thought was I needed to have in the title. And so in a way, I was married to that title for a
yeah.
while.
Yep.
She's living, and then so yeah, it just takes like a paradigm shift. Your brain has to like say, nope,
Mhm.
like you're allowed to change this thing that you stared at forever.
Yeah, and it can take a minute. Sometimes someone will suggest a new title, and as the author, you'll think, "No, I don't." But then if you just let it percolate for 24 hours, sometimes you start to go, "Well, I mean, maybe it could be that." And it's same with cover design.
Well, and I think the same with anything
Yeah,
in your book, like any feedback, because early
sure.
on, critiques and stuff. I mainly went through beta reads where I swapped the entire novel with other
Uh-huh.
writers, and I feel like when you're a writer of long fiction, that's kind of the best way to do it is just write the whole damn thing, then find these writers where you can swap it because in the beginning it's very developmental, the feedback. You can
Right.
go and fix a chapter forever, but then that chapter
Right.
does not belong in the book.
Correct.
And so I did a bunch of beta reads, but of course in the early phases there was feedback about characters that were like is that would require huge changes and putting together characters and taking out large things, which I ended up doing. But it's hard to take that feedback because, especially when they're like, "Oh, the writing's beautiful," but all this is wrong. You're like, "I don't know what you're talking about," but you
Mhm.
give it time. You have to step back from it, give it time. And sure enough, you get there where you're like, yeah, I can see. Yeah, maybe. All right. Okay. And then at the end of the day, you're in service of this novel. You're in service of it, trying to put it
Right.
out in the world. So for these readers. And so there's like a
It's
two-way.
like a give and take and a play. It's like it's kind of just a playful, moldable experience, but I just don't think going into a first book, especially a novel, which is so subjective when it comes to, if we're writing nonfiction, we at least have some facts to lean on.
Mhm.
But when you're right, even memoir, you have history, your own history to lean on, and things where you say, I'm not taking this out. But when it's pure fiction, even if it's influenced in some way by some things that have happened in your life. And also, well, to that point, sometimes you're emotionally connected to those
Mhm.
things, and we have to see that for ourselves and kind of go, oh, that's what's going on here. Okay, now that I've seen it, does
Mhm.
it still have to be there, or is it in better service of the story if I pull it back? Your book in print, but dreading the process? I get it. Writing a book is hard enough. That's where I come in. In addition to a step by step self publishing roadmap, I offer done for you publishing services to take the stress out of self publishing. From cover design to interior formatting to properly loading your book to distributors, I'm here to handle it while you catch up on laundry or your latest Netflix binge. Imagine your book professionally polished and available to readers worldwide without lifting another finger. Whether you need help with parts of the process or the whole darn thing, I've got you covered. Visit publishaprofitablebook.com and click on Self Publishing Services, or click the link in the show notes to learn more.
Yeah, always. And I mean,
Mhm.
when I did the beta reads, I always did them in rounds where there were at least two responses at the same time. So I didn't always
Mhm.
just take one person's response. And it was in the beginning, it was actually four. I did four together
Okay.
and just sort of what
Oh,
felt right. I
okay.
ended up doing that very, very big change. And then it was two and two and two. I ended up having like ten beta readers.
So that even gives me anxiety. Like, did you? And the reason it gives me anxiety is because there are two ways you can look at it. You can look at it like I'm getting all this feedback and I get to choose. So I'm getting a wealth of ideas from which I get to choose. And oh my gosh, what if they're all different? How will I know which one is air quote right? So I think some of it just comes down to personalities and how you work, but it sounds like that works really well for you. Do you like just having sort of a more voluminous?
You know what it is as long as I found that if I took what they had in common, if both of them or if they all said something similar, then I
Right.
kind of had to look at it. And I didn't necessarily, I didn't go with like line edits or anything like that. A lot of them did have line edits, but it was that overall general feedback and
Mhm.
reaction that
Mhm.
I was looking for as a, and then sitting with it, your intuition comes into play, and then you attack it, and you don't necessarily fix it in a way that they may be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I meant, but but you understand something is not quite working, and
Yeah.
so you figure out how to make it work better,
Right.
if that makes sense.
It does. Like you see something that you didn't see before
Yes,
because you're just too close. Now,
yes.
with your beta readers, are they also writers? Are they readers of this genre? How do you identify for yourself a good beta reader for you?
All of mine were writers because I
Mhm.
found them on writing websites
Okay.
and or workshops. And I felt like that was important because I don't know. I'm sure you can have beta readers who are just beta readers, but I also don't have access to that like group
Mhm.
of people. It's hard to find like
It is.
beta readers that are
It
just
it really is. Yep.
who also know how to respond. Anyway, but on the other side of that, though, they none of them really necessarily wrote in my genre. In the
Mm.
first four, there was one who was writing like police kind of cop fiction,
Okay.
and two that were writing kind of like I want to say magical realism
Mm.
sort of stuff.
That's something I don't read either because I don't. I get like I'm like what I have to text a kid of my own to be like, what are they talking about?
I am with you on magical realism for the most part. I still can't read A Hundred Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia because that's one
I've
of
not
my
read.
friends. It's an old, it's a classic book.
Yeah.
It's magical realism, and anyway. But yeah, I found them through writing websites, critiquematch.com and Scribophile.
Hmm.
I used those two and found
Okay.
was there and with people who wanted to swap because that was the other thing like I wanted to do something in response like I read their work and gave feedback too so
Sure. I'll put those resources too in the episode notes because I think, people are often curious, where can I find
yeah.
a good, a good beta reader for what I'm doing? And knowing, do you let your beta readers know exactly what you're looking for?
No, I
Or do you
mean,
just send it and say, what do you think?
yeah, it's sort of, yeah. What do you think?
Okay.
Because I mean, everyone's reading generally for developmental reasons, right? Like whether or not it makes sense. Whether I mean, of course, you're reading in the beginning to see if it pulls you in,
Sure.
and if that happens, great. But then you're reading for character arc and story arc, and I think that's why for me, I could only probably do it with writers because writers understand
They
that.
understand that.
Yeah.
Hmm. Right.
They're looking for a story arc. Whereas, like,
Yeah.
I think a reader who may not have had studied any craft would have been like, I didn't like it. I don't know why. I just didn't like it. And then what are you going to
And
say?
that's not helpful.
Right.
Right. It's equally unhelpful, I think, even though we all, and I shouldn't maybe say what everyone like, but I think a lot of us really subconsciously want someone to beta read and go, it's perfect. It needs nothing.
Yes.
As a writer myself, I actually don't. I want that for like 2 seconds, and I use what I call alpha readers for that. So when I know that's what I want, I give it to somebody who I know will just be like, "It's great," and then I hand it over to somebody who, because I know it's not great.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I know it's not, and so I need
Yeah.
someone to help me figure like untangle that.
Yeah. No. And you have to be able, like, you want someone who you know, like, how, like, to use a language that
Yes.
similar language, right? They
Yes.
have to kind
Like,
of
why isn't it working?
like your
What?
inciting
Mhm.
incident is
Mhm.
just not
There you
quite
go.
there, or like, do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Absolutely.
Or the character doesn't have a want here, or like, do
Right.
you like be able to, and then you'd be like, oh yeah, you're right, like
Yeah. Or you know what it is, it's in your head, but you just haven't put it on the paper well enough
Mhm.
yet. That's another thing is sometimes I don't know what psychology principle this is, but somewhere in our head is we know what the answer is. We know what the struggle is, but we haven't communicated it well, or we haven't communicated it soon enough.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
if you wait till the 50% mark to let someone know what the
Yeah.
goal of the main character is, like you've lost the reader by that point.
Oh, there's a lot of that. I mean, I critiqued a lot of work, and I found what you're just saying right there is a huge thing I found in lots of people's right. Like they felt like they're keeping a mystery, and like that would string you along. But really,
Mhm.
if you told them this earlier on, it creates more
Correct.
interest in mystery because now you want to see it happen,
Understand that
understand.
that's it.
Yes.
Right.
And so, yes, there was a lot of that I actually
Yeah.
found.
I think it's very common.
Hmm.
Okay, last question I always ask is what are you reading now or what have you read recently that you just absolutely loved?
Absolutely. Okay, now of course I
Or
just,
loved. We don't have to put,
I read a book. I had a conversation partner recently, and it's sitting right in front of me. So, Bright Eyes by Bridie Thielen Heidel. This is a memoir, and it was fantastic.
It looks really familiar, but I'm not sure why.
Absolutely loved it.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go back in my look. I read so much that sometimes I'm like, I just read This Is a Love Story, which is a Jenna pick, and its
Yep.
writing is really kind of very interesting and super cool.
Speaking of Jenna picks, I'll interrupt you again because I wanted to ask you if you've ever, because this was a Jenna pick, have you ever heard of this book? It's
I
The Great
have.
Divide. Okay, so it made me think I actually haven't read this yet either. This was Christina Enriquez was my neighbor when I was growing up. She lived right next door.
Wow.
And her parents and my parents are still dear friends.
Wow.
And I remember when her very first, she kind of just launched shortly after, I guess, she's a few years younger than I am, but it wasn't long after we kind of all left home that her first books came out. And she writes a lot about Panama. Her family, her father's side of the family is Panamanian. And so when I knew I was talking to you, I thought, wow, I wonder if they would know of each other because just with the Guyanese and the immigration and the families,
You know what's so funny is someone just recommended that book to me.
you're kidding.
Oh, at my book launch, I just had this launch party, and someone was,
Wow.
I think you're going to absolutely love, and recommended the Great Divide. So, isn't
It's
that
in my stack. Like I've now categorized the books in my house by read and not yet read because sometimes I even forget if I've read something and then I start reading it and I'm like, oh, I have read this. So I have different bookshelves now so that I can so this is at the height, at the top of the not yet read.
reread? Yes,
Mhm, to
I
be
have
read.
the
Yeah.
same issue. And you know how I try to remember what I've read because you read a lot because you do this podcast,
Right.
and you see so many writers, but I do keep like a Goodreads account, but I know there are other places to do this too, where I write a small summary of each thing, and it really does help me remember the book. Because even if I don't remember it, I just kind of go back to it and I read a couple of lines. I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I remember.
There it is.
Yes.
Well, and I do too. I sometimes, especially when, most of the time on this show, we don't talk about the book itself. We talk about the process and the writing part, the publishing process, the launch, all those certain things. So I don't hold myself to needing to have read the book prior. However, if I have, or when I do, I oftentimes put questions or comments in the very beginning. Now, some people would say that's total blasphemy, like to write in a book. I've been writing in books since I got in very big trouble once. I was maybe 4, 5, I don't know. And my grandmother had given me this little book, which is a little book, and it was all pictures. There were no words. And I guess that bothered me. So I took a crayon and I wrote out the word, Nanda, I was in a lot of trouble.
I remember the first book I wrote in. It was actually, gosh, now I'm blanking on the name too. I see
Of course.
Holden Caulfield, J.D. Saunders, the writer. Catcher in the Rye. It was Catcher in the Rye, and it was actually a library book, but I couldn't help myself. And so I started writing in pencil and thinking I'll go back and erase it. And then I was like, I'm just going to leave it. And I left it and returned it. So there's a library book out there, maybe
somewhere,
with all of my little notes. You
know what I think is the best thing ever is when I go to like an antique store and I buy an old book and they've taken notes, the margins, or they've written. Certainly, it breaks my heart, much like when I see black and white photos somewhere and I think that's someone's family. Like what I want to buy, and I have bought photos and named them, and I don't know that we'd have to talk to a psychologist about what that says about me. But same thing like with books, when there's a dedication or not a dedication, if the book's been given as a gift, and at the front it says, to Johnny, love Grandma, 1964. I'm like, Johnny, poor, like. Wow, but here's your book. Where are you? But I love it when people make little notes in the margin. I don't know, it just or underline.
Yeah.
Because then I think, oh, that struck them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do like, when you read Kindle, sometimes it'll tell you, like, if you underline a part that other people have done it too. Yep. Like, feel kinship.
This is a popularly underlined thing. I love that. I do. Because it develops this sense of invisible community. Mm-hmm. Like we're all relishing in this line that this person just came up with out of thin air. Yeah. And look how many people it caused to stop in their tracks long enough to highlight it because they didn't want to forget it.
Yes. Isn't that so great? I mean, and so when I do get reviews, there are a couple of reviews that have been posted by readers where they underlined parts and they showed the part. Those mean so much to me too, because I'm like, you that line, like there's a line that then
there's a story behind why that line affected them always.
Yeah.
And God, wouldn't it be fun to just have an event where everyone could say, everyone had like 90 seconds to say, this line affected me because.
Yes. Yeah.
That would be all fun. The stories. Yeah. That would be cool. Well, I wish you all the, not luck, but just joy, because this is such an industry of luck. So of course I wish you that, but just the joy. I love how much you're enjoying.
Oh, it's been so
launch. And I cannot wait to get my copy and read it cover to cover and make notes. I'll send you my underlined.
Do it, please.
My underlined pieces. I will.
Do it. This is such a great conversation. Thank you.
It was. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, this is your friendly reminder to follow or subscribe, leave a quick review, and share it with someone you know has a great story or message, but isn't sure what to do next. Also, remember to check out publishaprofitablebook.com for book writing resources and tips, and to see all the ways we can work together to get your book out into the world. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk with you again soon. Is starting a podcast on your wish list or your to-do list? If so, check out my podcast starter pack. It's 35% off right now with code PODCAST35. This straightforward, no-fluff guide enables you to start your author podcast in just a few days by providing you with everything you need to get that podcast launched without overwhelm or overthinking. This mini course covers effective episode planning strategies for newbies and experienced interviewers alike, exactly what recording equipment you need. You'll get the links to all of the equipment I use, surefire and slightly unorthodox tips for finding and approaching potential guests, 5 creative ways to keep your podcast interesting, my simple podcast editing tips, no outsourcing required, and creative ways to monetize your podcast even when you have an audience of 3. You'll also get my podcast intro and outro templates, email templates for guests, show notes templates, customizable show graphics, and my printable podcast planner. Again, the code for 35% off is podcast35. Visit publishaprofitablebook.com/podcast35 Podcast 101 to get started. Link is also in the episode notes. And now back to the episode.